And you get the other one when you come back that way.
Okay.
We're live.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Welcome to the January 2024 edition of The Spirit on Tap. I'm so glad you're here tonight. If you didn't hear just a moment ago, if you haven't already put your license plate number in the kiosk just to my right, your left, you want to do that, you'll get free parking until 10:30, I think it is, or something like that. So please be sure to do that. Also, I want to mention that there are some baskets here or containers for any contributions you wish to make. This is a free event, but we do have incidental expenses, so if you would be so inclined, we'd appreciate any contributions that you would like to make. Our purpose is to gather together in a setting where challenging and complex current social and religious faith issues are shared and discussed. We're not here to judge, but rather to create a safe space for significant conversation. Please be respectful of others and the views that they express. There will be a presentation of 45 minutes to an hour, roughly. And the remainder of our time will be used for questions and comments. Do we have another microphone? We do. Okay, so although we want to encourage a good discussion, please don't dominate the conversation to a point where others are unable to share their thoughts. When we come to that point in the program, we ask you to raise your hand, and the microphone will be brought to you. The famous Reverend Dr. Steve Onson will bring you the microphone, and you can share your thoughts so we can all hear that. We believe if we can hold to this format, everyone will leave here tonight enriched. We'd like to thank, once again, the Doubletree Hotel for their generosity in offering us this venue. If you haven't heard it before, and some of you have heard it 100 times, this is the #1 ranked Hilton brand hotel in the world. In Reading, Pennsylvania. I'm still astounded. I don't know how many times I've said that, but we need some kind of positive stuff going on here. It's a great gift for which we're very grateful. Now I'd like to introduce to you Reverend Dr. Harry Serio, who will introduce our speaker for tonight.
I'm delighted to see so many of you here today, and it all speaks to the situation that autism is more common than most people realize. We're very grateful for our speaker tonight, and we want to recognize that autism apparently is a neurological disorder that occurs in a lot of people. It's a spectrum disorder that manifests itself differently in each person. I'm sure Claire is going to be talking about the nature of that, as well as what is being done in the Reading Brooks area. Prior to our gathering here, I was talking with Greg Poole, the manager of the Doubletree, and he says that he has hired about almost 40 people who are autistic in various capacities. And what we're hearing this evening from Claire Malfaro is her efforts to create a network here in the Reading Brooks area that will assist persons finding employment. Claire is, we spoke about it, I guess it was a year ago, and she told me that her interest is in producing a group that's called Positively Reduced Foundation, which is to help employers in employing autistic persons. And she has a background that's well qualified. She is a psychologist and practices at Heath Fire Psychology in Wyomissing,
I wasn't really sure about who would be here tonight, so I have a wealth of information, and Harry had asked me if I would do a little bit of an overview about autism in general before I talked about what we have done in incorporating our nonprofit. So I not only have the experience of my work life, but I am also the parent of a young man who has autism. And so my background is in psychology and education, and my second child at the age of 7 was diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome. And so what I did is I kind of pivoted my professional life as much as possible to learn what I could, really as a parent also, so that I could try to provide the greatest amount of services within my home. And I remember early on, I started getting referrals in Berks County, and I said something to a parent, and they said, well, they said that you were the expert in this area, and I thought, oh, if I'm the expert in this area, you know, we really need to kind of expand our expertise. But I've spent the majority of my career really learning as much as I could, and that is the springboard from which I am jumping in developing this nonprofit. So, you know, autism advocacy is what I want to talk about. And I'm going to talk a little bit about autism as a whole, just for those of you who maybe don't know very much about it. I'm going to do an introduction, why it matters for all of us. Because the other piece to this is my faith. And I am going to talk a little bit about an experience that I had with someone else who started a nonprofit, and the story that he told 44 years ago. He started a nonprofit in Philadelphia. And the other thing we're going to talk about is the reality is that autism is a lifelong condition. It is not a mental illness. It is what is called a developmental disability. And that means you're born with it and you die with it. And so for a long time, people received services as children, and then they grew up into adulthood, and lo and behold, there was this belief that, you know, it was going to go away. And that's not quite how it works. The development of the nonprofit, and then talking to you as a community. You know, myself as the parent of a child, but also a professional who has spent many, many years and very willingly and happily to be able to serve this community. And I ask for assistance from our community in doing this. So autism is not a mental illness, it's a developmental disability. In order to be diagnosed with autism, it's called a spectrum disorder, meaning that it isn't a singular disorder, that there are a variety of symptoms that people can show. At this point, in order to receive a diagnosis, each of the 3 areas of social deficit have to be met, and there have to be 2 of the 4 behavior types. And that means persistent deficits in social communication, social interaction across multiple contexts. And those are the contexts. Social reciprocity. Reciprocity meaning just like the back and forth that goes on in the way that we talk to each other. You know, somebody introduced themselves to me today, and I waited for her to finish speaking, and then I spoke to her, and then I asked her questions. That is an example of how we have reciprocity and socialization. Nonverbal communication. You know, all of us realize, maybe you don't even realize the extent to which we communicate non-verbally, much more than we communicate verbally. And if you have a deficit in non-verbal communication, that unfortunately creates a deficit in others understanding you and understanding your experience and what you're trying to say. and social relationships. The behavior types are restrictive, repetitive patterns of behavior. In some people, those restrictive patterns show themselves in great interest. People may have particular interests, like I'm talking interests where I was sharing this during the evening. I had dinner with some of the pastors who sponsor this, and I said that in the autism community, the most common area of interest is transportation. And that is both trains, but also the Titanic. And so there are individuals who they learn every bit of information that they can. But go back to what I talked about with the reciprocity. And unless the person you're talking to has that same interest in the Titanic, speaking about it for 45 minutes isn't necessarily welcome. The stereotyped movements are an area that we see in some people. Some of you may know it as a tic. There could be a physical movement for some people. Not everyone. Again, this is a spectrum disorder. Some people have these symptoms, some do not. Insistence on sameness. That is one of the particular areas of behavior, the fixated interests. And the other is this, and this has to do with the central nervous system and the way that our brains process sensory input. Many people with autism have a sensitivity to sensory input that can be both hyper or hyposensitive. Hyper being that there's like an over-registration of, say, for example, if my voice was loud, that for somebody who was sitting in here who had hypersensitivity, they would be bothered by my loud voice. Hyposensitivity is an under-registration. And where we see that, especially in children, is they're seeking input. They touch things. They're not taking in the same way that our brains are. So there's something called a sensory integrative disability. And really what that means is that all the information that your senses are bringing in have difficulty integrating themselves. And so, like, when you think about if you have a pair of pants on and they might be too tight around your waist, or, you know, or there's a little buckle or something and that bothers you, and you want to stand up and you want to kind of get rid of that feeling. A lot of people on the autism spectrum have that feeling all the time. Imagine what that's like. So the prevalence, 1 in 45. That's what we say now, at this point, 1 in 45. So I looked up the population of Berks County, and I got it from 2022. And that means that there are approximately 10,000 people in Berks County at this point who are diagnosed. Who knows how many there actually are? Because, as many of you will probably say in your own mind, you might say to me, well, it wasn't around in the same degree when I was young, right? So why? Why the increase? Well, it was around. It was around. Now, part of the reason is that approximately 50% of individuals who have autism also have what's called an intellectual disability. Many of you may have known that as mental retardation. And what I remember as a child is that my mom volunteered at an organization where I grew up, and there were children who had helmets on. And the reason for the helmets was because they knocked their heads against walls. And what I know now is that the majority of those people had intellectual disabilities as well. So what used to happen is people who had autism and an intellectual disability were diagnosed. But those people who had either average or above average IQ were kind of seen as being your odd Uncle John or somebody like that, you know? They talked about the Titanic all the time, or they struggled, oh, that's just how he is. And so it isn't as though suddenly now there are all these people with autism. What's happened is we've begun having people who have higher IQs diagnosed. Now, Asperger's syndrome was known for a period of time as a diagnosis in the United States. It still is an international diagnosis. Asperger's syndrome is named for a man who was a pediatrician in Austria. His name was Hans Asperger. And Asperger wrote in the German language prior to the Second World War. That information was not translated into English until 1986. So again, people will say, like, why didn't it exist? Well, it existed. It sat somewhere. And what Asperger found is he found that in his practice, he had children who he called little professors. And they were intelligent, and they had difficulty in social reciprocity, in the use of social language, and they had restricted interests. So now we don't use Asperger's syndrome as often. We use it clinically, but part of the reason that it's been removed is because individuals had a higher IQ, they often were not able to get services. And again, children were getting a lot of services, but then there was this idea, well, if you have an IQ of 125 and you graduated from high school, you don't really need services anymore. You can live in the real world. But the reality of it is, and when you see some of the information that I'm going to show you, you'll be shocked, and it's a disgrace in our nation that we have the level of unemployability and underemployability of people on the autistic spectrum. It is a travesty. There was something that was used in the literature, thank God, that I had never heard about this until way, way later in my career. They called mothers refrigerator mothers who were raising children on the autistic spectrum. And there were all these crazy ideas about where autism had come from. Of course, we know that is not the case now. So a lot of people who would not have been diagnosed in the past, it isn't they didn't have autism, it's just that they did not receive the diagnosis. Nowadays we have early intervention. In Berks County, we have it through the Berks County Intermediate Unit. So a lot of kids are being recognized early. And IDEA is the Individual with Disabilities Education Act. And under that act, children who are identified by service providers, it could be like somebody in the preschool, could be a kindergarten teacher, somebody, in the community, these children are afforded a free evaluation. And so now we're able to see diagnosis at a much higher rate. So what happens, though, is this. This is what's called the services cliff. And we're fortunate in Pennsylvania because Drexel University has an autism center, and they're doing an enormous amount of research there. But the research is telling us that what's happening is people are diagnosed, they receive services. If you are diagnosed with special needs in the United States, you are permitted to receive services until the age of 21 under your public school. What happens is your child can, we call it bank the diploma, so they can walk with their class, but they're actually not graduated and they can continue to receive services. A lot of people don't even know this. But what happens at 21 is, see ya. And the reality of it is that approximately 25% of people are employed who are on the autistic spectrum, regardless of IQ. So you're talking about the large majority of people. I have a study from Drexel that came out in August, and it's worse than this. The latest study from Drexel is even worse than this. So think about it. You know, when you think about how do people get hired? How do they get hired? They get hired generally through an interview. And an interview is a social interaction. The exact area of greatest deficit for people on the autism spectrum. So, you know, I have this child. He's not a child anymore. He's 30, 32. And Michael is very fortunate. He's here today because, you know, I have a wealth of knowledge, and so I give Michael the best services that Michael can get. And Michael graduated from college. Michael went to Kutztown University and graduated from Kutztown with a degree in professional writing, and felt fairly certain that what would happen is that he would get a job. And what happened is Michael became, for me, I mean, obviously he's my son, but like a case study of the reality of what's happening. And I knew even prior to his graduation, and so what I began to do is I began to seek information regarding services that are going on nationwide. And about 9 years ago, I was invited to a conference in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, that was founded by Autism Speaks, but it was held in a place that was a nonprofit called Extraordinary Ventures. And I have information from Extraordinary Ventures here. Extraordinary Ventures, what they did is they developed businesses specific to employ people with autism. Now, there was a foundation called the Ireland Foundation, and you know they had quite a bit of money, and through that they were able to start. They've run at this point they have 5 businesses going. They're all on the same site. They make candles. They have office management coalition. They do bus cleaning. All the public transportation in Chapel Hill is free, and so they clean the public buses. They run an events center, and they also do a parking for all the college football in the area. And so they have these businesses, and all of the employees are on the autistic spectrum. What they've done is they've partnered with the universities there, and they have interns who come in, and then they have a handful, they have a board, they have a handful of people. But Extraordinary Ventures had this conference, and what they did is they brought successful businesses from around the United States to come and present and talk about what you could do. And I went to it, and at that point, there's another nonprofit here in Berks County that's called Unending Promise. Some of you may be familiar with it. And it seemed as though their intention was that they were going to try to employ adults. And so I went and came back and shared the information. And a couple years went by, and it wasn't coming to fruition. It wasn't coming to fruition. And then I experienced what I did with Michael. So what I did is last year I attend religious services at an abbey outside of Philadelphia. My son is a student at Villanova University, my younger son, and I go down there. And one day, one of the priests got up and he told this story. And the story that he told, I wrote his name down because his name is Dominic Rossi. And Dominic Rossi told this story about how he felt that he was being called by God to develop a nonprofit. And he said, but he kept thinking he was getting the wrong information because he said he believed that he was being called to develop a nonprofit in Center City, Philadelphia, and that he was, I'll tell you the words that he used, a coward. He said he was a coward, that he was afraid to go into the city, and that he had a nickname when he was a kid, and so he kept putting it off and putting it off, and it was stronger and stronger upon his conscience that he was supposed to do this. And so he spoke it out loud to people, and I thought, oh yeah, that's something hard to do, because it goes from then within our own minds and hearts, you know, it becomes like more of a community incident. And he told this story that I'll try to, in a nutshell, tell you what happened. There were homeless women in Philadelphia that they decided they wanted to buy a house and open a homeless shelter, and the community balked at it, as often happens. And it got bad enough that there was a legal suit that was brought against, it's called the Bethesda Project, and to try to not allow them to purchase this land. And he said that he had spoken to all these people in the community, and they said, well, you said that God wanted you to do this, so keep going. And he said, you know, Philadelphia, and now I have this legal stuff, and he said, and somebody in the congregation came and said, I'll give you pro bono legal help, and I'll go down there and I'll fight this for you. And it happened, and they lost. And he said, you know, there we go, guess I was wrong. And he said, but the people that he had spoken to about it said, no, I don't think so. And the pro bono guy said, like, it's okay, I'll stick with it and we'll appeal. And then he said, and I'll never forget this, sitting in there, he said, I got a message from the city of Philadelphia, and they said, we have never had an experience like this before. All of the stenographer's information from the hearing has been lost. And the neighborhood community does not want to continue to pursue this. And I remember sitting there going like, what? Like, really? And then he said, 44 years later, we now have 15 locations. And so I'm like, oh, you know. So I'm going to tell you what he said, and this is my sense as well. Seeking God's guidance and believing that we are all members of one family, the mission of the Bethesda Project is to find and care for the abandoned poor and be family to those who have none. So I have spent my adult career working with individuals with autism and falling in love with them, not just my son, and seeing that they are not being given a chance. And I want to be the voice. And so I approached people in the community. I wrote a letter. Harry was one of the people. And another person was Craig Poole here at the Doubletree. And so I've had assistance. The Doubletree granted me a forum, and we held a gala, and we raised some money, and in June we incorporated as a nonprofit. Now, let me tell you, the IRS is so far behind at this point that we incorporated as a nonprofit, but we are not a nonprofit yet because 8 months in, they've done their part. However, what that has done is it's given me an opportunity to really educate myself about nonprofits a little bit more, and so moving forward, I need help from the community. I would like to share also about some theologians and what they have to say, not just Dominic Rossi. There is a geophysicist by the name of Xavier Lepichon, and he is he's still alive, he's one of the earliest pioneers on plate tectonics. And Lepichon says that the fragility of humanity being encompassed into community is actually the evolution of humanity. Lepichon talks about that. I'll give you a quick overview of plate tectonics, okay? Like, I think that most of you understand that there are plates, and that the continents are part of the way that the earth was created, and there's fragile space in between those plates. And what Lepichon says is the fragility of that space is what has actually permitted the earth to continue. And that we need to, as humankind, see the fragility of other human beings as being something positive, and that it actually is a part of all of us. Lepichon says fragile parts of the earth actually strengthen it. The fissures where earthquakes and volcanoes happen have permitted the earth to exist. And so it must be with us. And so rather than perceive people who are different, people who have a different way of being and are fragile, they are fragile people. Any of you here, I know that some of you here, I recognize a few of you from the gala, I know that you have family members and you know what I'm talking about. There is a fragility, but that we as a community, if we are able to circle the individuals and to be able to allow us all to work together, this is how we will continue to evolve. Lepichon says we go from being human to humane. And he is another one that when when I wake up in the night and I think, is this going to be okay? How is this going to move forward? I'm going to tell you this story. Lepichon, French, was born in Indochina, and his father owned a rubber plantation. And when the Second World War broke out, because the French citizens were in Indochina, according to whatever was going on in France, is how he and his family were they free, were they not free? And Lepichon said that when he was 8 years old, France surrendered to Germany, and they were put into a concentration camp in Indochina. And he said, and his mother, he described that he has attended Mass from the age of 6 years old every single day. Just gave some idea of the devotion of his mother. And Lepichon said this. He said, the camp commandant came into their home and said to the parents, tomorrow we're going to come and we're going to call people out, and when they are called, Only they are not to come, and do not follow them. If you follow them, you will be killed, because they're going to be killed. And Le Pichon says, this guy leaves, and there he is with his family. And he said his mother turned and said, well, tomorrow that might happen, but today you're going to do your lessons. and I hear that, and I think to myself, the same thing as Dominic Rossi. Like, we're not guaranteed tomorrow, or really whatever may come our way tomorrow. And I'll switch to the Lutheran tradition and remind you about Dietrich Bonhoeffer. And Bonhoeffer says, we do God's work for our brothers and sisters when we learn to listen to them. Dietrich Bonhoeffer was a Lutheran minister who had traveled to the United States and met the African American community in New York and felt that, that we had not served them well in our country, and that what was going on with the Jews in his country was very similar to that. And so, although he was safe here, he left and went back to Germany. Every Christian community must realize that not only do the weak need the strong, but also that the strong cannot exist without the weak. The elimination of the weak is the death of fellowship. That's what he said. So, the nonprofit, we have a board. We developed a board. One came willingly, and the rest came with arm twisted. I mean that much. We have tried to engage within the community, and we will continue to do so. It will be easier once we have our nonprofit status, because we can write grants, and we'll have an easier time. We did have the gala. It's quite expensive to incorporate as a nonprofit. The gala did not even cover the cost of that. Clients, obviously, I'm so glad for those of you who came tonight at the beginning and introduced yourself. When there was an article written in the newspaper about the nonprofit and about my son Michael, I received so many letters, and the journalist at the Reading Eagle said the same thing. He said, I'm going to just send them along to you. So there's not going to be any trouble finding people who are going to be able to be served. So we're in the kind of launch stage still, seeking support. What is it that we're going to do? We're called Neurodiversity Employment. And so, letter to the community, I met with the DoubleTree, completed the application, the introductory gala. We're waiting on the IRS for the development and the fundraising. What I'd like to do is I'd like to heavily focus initially in jobs and being able to help. I asked him if it would be okay, and he said it would be okay. So I'd love to share. For any of you who read the article in the newspaper, Michael graduated. He was working as a dishwasher at a restaurant, and I'm so pleased and very grateful to tell you that Fred Sheeler, who is the recorder of deeds, saw that article and reached out and asked for Michael's resume. And Michael was drug tested today, and next week will be working as a proofreader for Kathy Burks, the recorder of deeds. So it works, right? It works when people are willing to. Fred, read the whole article. Michael is a brilliant man. He has incredible skill. I mean, the things that the professors wrote about him. But when he interviewed, I'll give you an example. I did in the newspaper, and so it's already been made public. Mike, I hope you forgive me on this one. Mike interviewed at a place in Lancaster County, which is where we live, and made it to the second interview. It was a publishing company, and suddenly something happened, and it was a dead end. And when we talked about what happened, Mike, what happened? Michael doesn't drive, and so they asked Michael if he drove, and I said, as a neurotypical, a person not on the autism spectrum, I would know to answer a question like that by going, well, I have, appropriate transportation, right? And he said, what, you wanted me to lie? and I said, well, that's not really a lie, because you can Uber or we'll drive you, or, but he said no.
He sounds better at reading between the lines than us.
Well, and unfortunately, though, when you're being interviewed by somebody who's trying to check off the boxes and you say no, there was an occasion where he was interviewed and he made a statement. He said, I'm really not a people person. And they told him later they didn't hire him because of that. But the other aspect of what I love to do is, many of you maybe are familiar with the Mosaic House, and it would be great for us to also get a community center going, because those social difficulties create an enormous amount of social isolation. During COVID, I had many clients who I guarantee you I was the only person that those individuals spoke to. And COVID ended, and I still am often the only person. How do we get there? As individuals, the idea of social justice. Most families who have the experience of somebody with special needs within their family are willing to. This is a way for us to give a hand up, not a hand out to people. The community, there's such research on the positive impact. If we train all employees in the same manner that we train individuals on the spectrum, the work efficacy in those companies increases. It's a positive impact to the community as a whole. I talked about Nick Schon, Bonhoeffer. It's the right thing to do. We as a community can implement changes to better the world in which we live. We are all called to be our brother's keeper. The marginalization in our society are a fragile part of our world. We are connected to them in intricate ways, and if we allow, we can join in their vulnerabilities and create a stronger community together. Positively Produced Foundation is a nonprofit serving adults with autism with the goal of full community inclusion. This entails employment and overall societal and community engagement.
Okay, raise your hand if you have a comment or a question, and the microphone will be brought to you.
Thank you. That was a wonderful presentation. I really enjoyed everything that you had to say and got a lot of it and inspiration from it. I also have a son with autism, 50 years old, and he has worked competitively for a lot of his life. But with the way the economy is and everyone is hiring, it is impossible for us to get him employment at this time. And I'm just curious as to, you mentioned that you have 40 employees working. What do those people do as far as their work? And is there, like if someone isn't really acclimated to the kitchen and cooking, is there anything else on the outlying areas that someone could get benefit from?
So I don't have any employees, just to clarify. They shared that Craig Poole had met with them prior to me, and the DoubleTree has 40 employees. I think that's what was said, that there are 40 employees. So of course, kitchen work is not for everyone. and so the DoubleTree is working with us as the nonprofit is fully established to help them to continue to employ and to employ more people. But of course, those would have to be people who are acclimated to do the positions that they have available here. Michael, who graduated with his degree in professional writing, and Fred, who needed a proofreader, that is what we'll be doing. We will be looking for businesses, and we will work with the businesses. One of the things, that we have, and this is just a presentation, I met with Jim Oskov, I met with our city, Reading, is that we will recruit, we'll work with the job descriptions, we'll help in the application process as well as the interview. Michael opted to be interviewed by himself. We talked about it beforehand, and again, Fred knew, because he had read the article, so he knew the skills, but he also had some awareness of some of the difficulties. There are some businesses that wouldn't feel comfortable with having one of their individuals interview. And so it may be that we would sit in on the interview, or that we would actually do the interview and then meet with the person from the business. So there are, just to make you aware of this, Berks County doesn't have anybody doing this right now. I met with the county, and they admitted that they have nobody doing this. Unfortunately, there's not county funds for this. And so, they don't have anybody doing it, but they don't have the funds to help with it either. But there are businesses that are doing this in the Philadelphia area. There is something called the Neurodiversity Employment, I forget the third word. They invited me, they have a conference every quarter. And so they're working with the universities down there as people are graduating and helping in the process of the interviews, all the things that we're going to do. Kutztown and Alvernia are going to be brought in to this as well, because what else I would love to do is, I have a wealth of information, and this is kind of a niche. I don't see only people who are on the autistic spectrum, but probably at this point, at least 40 to 50% of my clients all are. But there are a lot of people who are graduating with degrees in social work or counseling or education, and if we can intern them the same way that Extraordinary Ventures did, then we will also be teaching those individuals in how to best serve this community. So it becomes like, something that positively feeds itself. That's what they're doing. Both at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill and Duke are sending interns in to Extraordinary Ventures. Greg Ireland mentored me through this process. He was to have come to the gala and has suffered a significant health setback, and so he wasn't able to. But the people who are doing this around the country are mostly like myself, parents, and they want to be able to help other communities. And so, Greg met with me. They've allowed me to use their business model. I can't really start my own business. It's just not, it's not where I am in my life, and it's not really my forte. But there are businesses that need employees, and many of the individuals, like Michael is not the only person. Kutztown has a program right now through OBR where there are all individuals who are on the spectrum who are graduating. and RAC also through disability services. So you're talking about people who, I mean, you know, everybody has a right to be employed, and we want to try to do as much as we can do. I have to start small. I have to. And Craig offered the kitchen. You know, they want to make appetizers, but it certainly is not for everyone.
You have someone over here?
I have 2 grandchildren. One has the Asperger's plus 4 other diagnosed. He is a tattoo person in California right now. He is always different. He's been different. My other grandson, I live underneath my son's upstairs. He has autism also. He works at Goodwill. He learned to do a forklift. He gets more vacation than I got after 10 years. He went to Johnstown College. He learned printing, but he learned printing to make a cup and pictures on that. Really neat, but there's nothing around here. So during school, from OER and that, he had worked from 16 on up. He went back to Goodwill, and of course, he progressed from there. My thing is that he could get a job anywhere and make more money forklifting. The thing is with his autism, and I don't know how your son feels, they are not comfortable around other people all the time. He says, I'm happy with the people I'm with. Because they have disabilities, they're not exactly like him. My biggest worry is being a grandmother is these children or these adults do not make enough money to live anywhere. So it's not just the job that's a problem, but me looking at my 2 grandchildren is I could work, I work running hospital, I learned the way prices and that are nowadays. Plus, they learn to function, but I just wish they had places for us seniors. Don't they have places that these children could have an apartment or these adults and live? That's all.
Yeah, so I will tell you this also again, as the nonprofit became kind of publicly known, another person who reached out to me is a woman who has something that's called Next Step Berks. And Next Step Berks is attempting to start an inclusive community in Berks County that would have housing. And so I will also leave this up here, and if you would like to write that information down. The woman, her name is Nancy Boyer. She is a teacher in the Wyomissing School District and has been kind of like me trying to do as much as she can do. But it's difficult to do these kind of things because government funding is very difficult to access unless, like, I could become a provider because I'm a professional and I could kind of jump through the hoops of doing it, but I have a job, you know, and I'm committed to the job that I have. And so what I'd like to do is I'd like to, as I need to work less because my youngest son is graduating from college now, I'd like to really dedicate my time to doing this as a volunteer through the nonprofit.
I'm aware of some individuals in Canada and in England that do research in this direction. And what they're finding is that they're at the neurophysiological level, there may be a link between temporal lobe epilepsy and some of the other problems that occur at a functional level within the brain. And this can be linked to the way the pineal gland manufactures and produces certain chemicals. Now, that's from the neuro level, but also from the observational level. They have noted that in the individuals they have connections with, that the hypersensitivities involved sometimes overlap into what we would call premonitions and precognitions. And the perceptions of not only past memories that might be instances in the past, flooding their memory and blocking what they perceive in front of them at the moment because they can't distinguish between the past and the current fast enough. And sometimes it's the other way around. They can't distinguish between the immediate future and the current. And what's blowing some of them away is that these perceptions of the future actually come true. So they have these premonitions. Now, this is an area that medical science doesn't really like to investigate. So this is causing a delay in the fully understanding of what's going on in this particular situations with autism. But with the link between the epileptic type seizures, I'm not talking about the full-blown ones, but the mini ones, and experiences that people describe in the near-death experience with the hypersensitivities and the enhanced sensitive of the sensory nature. There has to be a link between these aspects of behavior and that's being kind of overlooked. So I'm wondering, in your experience, if you have come across anything like this, or if anyone in the medical people that you deal with are even looking in this direction.
So I have not. I will tell you this. I've attended I've gone to a conference in New York City with many scientists. They had 10 TED Talks. I understood 9 of them. One of them, I don't know that anybody except the presenter understood that one. But I will tell you this, and this is just my own experience. The inability to lie well, and I forget the expression that you use, but calling a spade, people who call a spade, you were talking about during our dinner. In some ways, I feel that people with autism have qualities that are better than the rest of us. And I know that that's hard to hear at times because of the reality of the deficits that exist and how much of a challenge it is. But, I can't speak to that because it's outside of my area of expertise.
Are there other comments or questions?
Hello. I'm glad that I'm here. I actually just came for more information. I have a son and he's in the spectrum, and he's 16 years old, a teenager. And I just came because, it says here that after 18, it's getting harder for him, to get employed and get a job. And even right now, because again of his, like any teenager, they would like to work at Wendy's or McDonald's or stuff like that, but he's like, oh no, I couldn't handle being where, there's people sweating or the grease of food and all those sensitive issues that he has. So my question is so there's no here a place in the Mercer County that will guide you like where to look for a job with, for people that have this, that are in the spectrum?
So there is an agency, there's a national agency called OVR, which is the Office of Vocational Rehabilitation. If at the end you come to me, I'll give you my card too, and then I can kind of give you some more information. And I'd like to say also that imagine what the challenge is to get services when English is not your first language and you don't have the resources that a family like we had. And so there are levels of vulnerability that go way beyond this. And so I appreciate you speaking and come to me at the end and we'll connect.
Who else?
I just wanted to
Oh,
say.
I don't know.
I'm sorry.
I just want to mention, we always seem to want to define normal. And we were talking before dinner about people on the autism spectrum. And we all have quirks. Maybe not everybody knows what they are, but we all have them. And rather than deficits and disabilities, I would prefer to see them, people who are on the spectrum, as different abilities. Many of them are incredibly intelligent and can offer things that many of us can't. And so I'd rather focus on that rather than on the disability or the deficit. I also want to applaud the University of North Carolina and Duke on working together on anything.
Hi Claire, I'm Maureen Clark. I'm president of the Autism Society of Berks County and have been since 2018. We get phone calls every single day from people that are 16 years old and 50 years old, looking for ideas and ways to get employment. So we look forward to hearing what your plan is to get this started, and hopefully that you'll be there.
Thank you.
And there are a number of organizations here in Berks County already working with our youth and young adults. So we're happy to hear about what your plan is once you get things started. And we've been around since the year 2000. And we're an all-volunteer organization, too.
Are there others before I come?
You know, I spent 40 years in data processing, and there's a lot of people there that have Asperger's, and so they may not be good at relationships, they may be somewhat rigid, but they are brilliant programmers. So I agree totally with Bob. If we walk around saying deficit, 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 we're not doing anybody any favors, we're not recognizing the uniqueness of each individual.
What did we say? Normal is just a setting on the drive, right? Anybody else? Before we go over here again?
I just wanted to say to the lady in the back that since your son is 18, you said?
16.
16, that he could still be in school till he's 21. That's what I did with my son. Correct?
It increased to 22.
Yeah.
In September, and raised to 22 now in the state of Pennsylvania.
And those years that he stayed beyond graduating, like when he was 18, were so helpful because he learned more skills in working. And you should have a supports coordinator with an IEP that you might have, and that person should be helping you now, starting to plan as you're doing it.
Anyone else?
Claire, thank you so much for a very enlightening presentation. It was most informative and helpful. Unfortunately, too many people have an idea of autism from watching a good doctor on television. As you know, the autism is, as I say, is a spectrum, and there are many people who have different ways of expressing their inner self in terms of that. So I'm very glad to hear that there is a considerable development here in Berks County that will assist in finding employment for autistic persons. So thank you again. for that. Let me just say a word about next month's presentation. Since we're getting close to March 17th, St. Patty's Day, our program is going to be kind of Celtic in orientation. And if you haven't picked up a flyer, please do so. We will have some Irish and a little Scottish music here as well. We don't have step dancers, but the Shanakeans will be here, and they will play and they will talk about some of the tunes. And I'll be talking a bit about the Celtic idea of holy ground and thin places. So that'll be next February. And coming up in our presentations for future programs, we're going to have one on artificial intelligence, and we have two of our speakers here. Charlie Curtis will be speaking, and Dale Graff, and hopefully we'll have one other person that will be speaking from a theological point of view. I'll be also moderating that panel. Artificial intelligence, some people say, may be the death of our civilization. We're going to see how that works out. In April, Dr. Greg Carey, professor at Lancaster Theological Seminary, will be speaking about the immoral Bible. Some of you have read that part of it. Others just ignore it. But there are parts of the Bible, I'm thinking about the state of Florida banning books. Certainly if they use their criteria for banning books, they would certainly ban the Bible. So Greg Carey will talk about that as well. And then our final program this year will be on domestic violence and homelessness with Safe Berks. We're looking ahead to next year, and if you have any ideas, you want to make any suggestions or offer to do a program, please let me know. You can email me. My address is on here, and we'll consider that. Just a reminder, too, that if you are not a part of our subscription base and would like to receive monthly notices of this event, as well as the other Spiritual Exploration Project events that are held in West Lawn and in Kutztown, just sign your name and your email address on there, and we'll add you to the list. And also, we will welcome any donations that you care to make to help defray expenses that we should have from time to time. Bob, Steve, is there anything else that you want to?
Yeah, this program, all our programs, at least when I'm here, are on Facebook Live and then posted on our Facebook page, and then also YouTube. We have a YouTube channel, so if you want to see it, share it with somebody, that's where they'll find it.
By all means, share it, because it's important. Bob?
I was just in Orlando last week, and I was watching the news one night, and just a tidbit of information. The Florida legislature banned sociology from all universities, state universities, and they said now they're going to be teaching history. So whatever that means, I'm not sure.
History their way.
Yeah, and sociology.
Yeah.
Very true.
God bless America.
God bless America.
Thank you all for coming.